Good evening and welcome to Belfast, a city in the midst of a huge commemoration for the most famous ship ever built, the Titanic. More than 25,000 people applied to be part of tonight's event, in which we will remember the many hundreds who perished and those who survived, but whose lives were changed forever by the events that took place exactly 100 years ago tonight. Here, at the Waterfront Hall in the heart of Belfast, just over a mile from where she was constructed, you will see a series of short documentaries, hear eyewitness accounts of that fateful journey, and see performances from, among others, Bryan Ferry, Joss Stone, Nicola Benedetti, Alfie and Maverick Sabre, in an event we hope will be a fitting tribute. Live from the city where Titanic was built. "100 years ago today, a passenger liner called Titanic hit an iceberg in the North Atlantic 400 miles southeast of Newfoundland. The great liner was en route to New York during its maiden voyage. The ship, described as practically unsinkable by its owners, the White Star Line, took 2 hours 40 minutes to fill with water and sink with the loss of more than 1,500 souls. Remarkably, more than 700 people survived what was to become the most famous disaster in maritime history.
There was peace, and the world had an even tenor to its way. Nothing was revealed in the morning, the trend of which was not known the night before. It seems to me that the disaster about to occur was the event that not only made the world rub its eyes and awake, but woke it with a start, keeping it moving at a rapidly accelerating pace ever since, with less and less peace, satisfaction, and happiness. To my mind, the world of today awoke April 15th, 1912.
The news of the Titanic disaster was received with almost disbelief.
There are stories of grown men actually in tears in the street.
Here was the greatest ship in the world. This was her maiden voyage. She was unsinkable, and she hits an iceberg.
You had the very wealthy and you had the very poor, and to some degree nature overpowered them all.
Well, I think fundamentally Titanic is a signifier for the inevitable failure of flaunted technology, the fragility and fallibility of human ambition, and I think also the shipwreck of dreams.
Long float on distant oceans, I did all my best to smile, till your singing eyes and fingers drew me loving to your right, and you sang, sail to me, sail to me, let me enfold you. Here I am, waiting to hold you. Did I dream you dreamed about me? Were your hair when I was far? foolish heart is leaning, broken love lying on your rocks. For you say, touch me now, touch me now, come back tomorrow. Oh my heart, oh my heart, sighs from the sorrow.
The Edwardian age in which Titanic was built is an era synonymous with social change. It was a time of great opulence for some, but a harsh, tough life for most. For people of every class, though, Titanic offered the chance to travel to a land defined by its optimism, the United States of America. The North Atlantic crossing in the early 20th century was the most profitable steamship route in the world, with British ships competing with French, Belgian, and especially German liners for passengers. Scores of ships crossed and recrossed the Atlantic, carrying everyone from the rich and famous in first class to emigrants in steerage, hoping to start a new life in the land of opportunity.
The United States was a magnet for the largest number of European immigrants in the 19th century and into the early 20th because it was the hottest, most dynamic economy in the world. It was the place where growth was exponential.
At last, I was going to America. Really, really going at last. The boundaries burst, the arch of heaven soared. 1,000,000 suns shone out for every star. The winds rushed in from outer space, roaring in my ears, America! America!
New York at the turn of the 20th century was a city that had exploded in size over the last 80 and 90 years and had become one of the world's great cities. It was immensely rich. Fifth Avenue at that time was the greatest millionaires' row the world has ever seen. And we were building buildings like Grand Central and the New York Public Library. It was a very vibrant and very assertive city at that time.
This was the age of the Carnegies and the Astors, the plutocrats who'd got rich in the Gilded Age. And the richest of them all, John Pierpont Morgan, who dominated American industrial finance. His library, built of pink marble from Tennessee, still stands in Midtown Manhattan.
J.P. Morgan was probably the most powerful banker who ever lived. He was a formidable figure. There was no banker today who has 1% of the power and prestige that J.P. Morgan had.
Keen to have a slice of the lucrative North Atlantic liner business, Morgan bought the British company White Star Line in 1902 for $32 million, the equivalent today of $837 million.
Morgan's business plan for the White Star Line was basically to build not a monopoly perhaps, but more or less of a cartel, where he would dominate the transatlantic travel business and to hook it up with railroads so that you could have a through trip from, Chicago. It would take you straight all the way to Paris.
White Star's main competitor, Cunard, had had great success with their new liners, Lusitania and Mauretania, which had been designed for speed. For his plan to work, Morgan needed to build 3 super-size luxury liners.
The idea was they'd be half as large again as the Cunarders. They were not to be the fastest ships at sea, but they would offer superlative standards of accommodation and comfort, and with high standards of safety.
Morgan, along with White Star Line's managing director Bruce Ismay, thought that the race for the North Atlantic was as much about fashion and comfort as it was about speed. They knew that to attract the rich elite used to wining and dining in the luxury hotels of the age, the ship's own accommodation needed to be equally lavish.
This was an attempt to provide the best service, a floating hotel, the creme de la creme of contemporary transportation. So they wanted to make sure that their impact was of the biggest, best ship. The ship hadn't been built before people were talking about this gigantic ship that was the most luxuriant ever. So in that sense, the world was already expecting something incredible from the Titanic before it even set sail.
The contract to build these huge ships went to Harland and Wolff in Belfast. The year 1908. Work on the Olympic, Britannic, and the most luxurious of them all, Titanic, could now begin.
Up in a town that is famous as the place of movie. The noise was always loud. There were sirens all around, and the streets are me. If I could make it here, I could make it anywhere. That's what they say. See my face and lights on my name on marquees down on Broadway. Even if it ain't all it seems, I got a pocket full of dreams, baby. I'm from New York, concrete jungle where dreams are made of. There's nothing you can do. Now you're in New York. Will make you feel brand new. Big lights will inspire you. Hear it for New York, New York, New York. On the avenue, there ain't never a curfew. Ladies work so hard. Such a melting pot on the corner selling rock. Preachers pray to God. Hail a gypsy cab takes me down from Harlem to the Brooklyn Bridge. The sun will sleep tonight with a hunger far more than an empty fridge. make it by any means. I got a pocket full of dreams, baby. I'm from New York, concrete jungle where dreams are made of. There's nothing you can do. Now you're in New York. These streets will make you feel brand new. Big lights will inspire you. Hear it for New York, New York, New York. One hand in the air for the big city. Street lights, big dreams, all looking pretty. No place in the world that can compare. Put your lighters in the air, everybody say yeah, 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 yeah. New York, concrete jungle where dreams are made of. There's nothing you can do. Now you're in New York, and these streets will make you feel brand new. Big lights will inspire you. Hear it for New York, New York, New York.
Belfast Newsletter, 21st of October, 1910. It is a matter of real gratification to all of us in Belfast that the Olympic and the Titanic should be built here. And in undertaking the construction of vessels of such enormous proportions, it is felt that Messrs. Harland and Wolff are maintaining their own splendid traditions, and at the same time, indicating the rights of the Ulster capital to be reckoned as one of the greatest shipbuilding centres in the world.
Belfast in the 1900s was a very vibrant city. It was an industrial city. It had grown rapidly in the past 100 years. It was a city that was bursting with self-confidence and pride.
It was unlike any other city in Ireland, more like the industrial cities of Britain. Its wealth was based on production of linen and engineering, and in particular shipbuilding.
In March 1909, the building of Titanic began with the laying of the keel in Harland and Wolff shipyard. She was to be built alongside her sister ship Olympic. This was the biggest shipyard in the world at the time, but it needed to be expanded to build what would become the largest moving objects on the planet.
It was a major shipbuilding challenge to construct a ship as big as Titanic. New slipways were laid down. A huge steel gantry was built over them. It was a huge investment in shipyard, plant and infrastructure and workforce.
Built up by the company chairman, Lord Ferry, this was the most sophisticated shipyard in the world.
Lord Ferry had served his time through the shipyard, man and boy. He began as an apprentice, became a practical shipbuilder, he became a partner in the company. So he worked his way right to the top. Lord Ferry was the archetypal, big visionary, big player, big-time businessman from Belfast.
When Titanic was being built here, 15,000 people poured through the gates of Harland and Wolff every day.
To build a ship like Titanic required a huge number of specialist shipbuilding trades, from riveters to platers to joiners to fitters to painters to plumbers. As many trades you could possibly think of were required to build a ship like Titanic, because really what you were building was a floating town.
Many thousands of people were dependent on the yards for employment, but not all of them could secure full-time contracts.
A lot of people would be casually employed. They would go down every day and hope to get picked on, as it were.
It was a rather demeaning experience. They would all gather at the gates, and the foreman would come to the gates, and he had infinite power to just say, you, 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 you.
The drawing offices where the vision for Titanic was conceived now lie empty. In 1909, dozens of draftsmen worked in these offices, drawing sections of the ship to scale. They were overseen by Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer and nephew of Lord Pirrie. And outside these windows, those paper plans were being transformed into ships of steel.
The steel hull had to be erected on the slipway. Then the hull had to be plated, and the whole structure was held together by steel pins called rivets, and there were millions of these used in the construction of Titanic.
There was a relatively small amount of electricity being used in those days, but Harland and Wolff were ahead of the times. The shipyard had its own generating station to provide electricity for tools, machinery, and for lighting the entire site.
Harland and Wolff dominated the landscape, and they could visibly see the signs of shipbuilding.
The shipyard cranes and gantries were visible at the end of every street, and the presence of the shipyard loomed over our little working-class houses.
Belfast impresses you as being a very rich and busy city. And out of the water, beyond the custom house, dimly seen through smoke and mist, rose some huge, shapeless thing, which I found to be a shipbuilding yard, wherein 10,000 men were hammering iron and steel into great ocean liners. The noise of wheels and hoofs and cranks and spindles and steam hammers filled my ears and made my head ache.
The working conditions 100 years ago were like nothing we could tolerate today. You did physical, heavy, dirty, dangerous work all day, particularly the riveters, going up 60, 70, sometimes 80 feet onto scaffolding. They would go on those planks at 5 o'clock in the morning. The planks would be covered with ice, bird droppings. Injury was accepted, and death was not uncommon.
During the building of Olympic and Titanic, a report listed 246 accidents, of which 8 were fatalities.
My great-grandfather, he was a riveter. Robert James Murphy, he was the riveter who fell to his death on the Titanic. His son, also called Robert James Murphy, he had fallen to his death from the scaffolding 6 months earlier on the Olympic. An extraordinary coincidence. I just have a feeling that life was cheap.
The taking of the hull to the water for the very first time is a very important stage in the construction of the ship. She's moving into the water and is afloat for the very first time, and it marks the transition from an inert mass of steel, land-bound, to a living, floating vessel on the water.
When Titanic was launched, she became the largest moving object on the planet. She was 882 feet 9 inches long. Fitting out the most luxurious ship in the world took another 10 months. On April the 2nd, 1912, Titanic sailed to Southampton on her first voyage.
Large numbers of people did come to see the Titanic leaving Belfast. This was a ship the size that people could not imagine, would never have seen. And of course, it obviously generated a huge amount of interest. People knew people who'd worked on the Titanic, and there was a great excitement about coming to see this and to see it waved off and to know that this was it setting off on its maiden voyage.
Titanic's arrival in Southampton marked the start of the huge operation of preparing the ship for the voyage to New York. Cargo, mail, food and drink all had to be loaded in great quantities, and her crew had to be interviewed and signed up.
There was 900 crew on the Titanic. 300 were in the engine department, trimmers, firemen, that sort of thing, but 500 were in the victualling department to look after the passengers, including stewards and things like that.
Nearly 700 of the crew who were taken on for the maiden voyage came from Southampton.
Titanic represented state-of-the-art technology in every way. For example, she had electric cranes for handling all the passengers' baggage. She had 10,000 electric light bulbs. She had elevators powered by electricity. And these were really wonders that drew passengers to the ship.
A dedicated boat train brought many of the first-class passengers directly from London Waterloo to the quayside at Southampton.
People getting aboard the Titanic would have come from all walks of life. And so Southampton docks must have been a massive confusion. Noise, bustle, people with large trunks, but also people with sacks on their backs with all their worldly possessions gathered together. So there'd be noise and confusion, but also excitement as well, as they all tried to get their goods and possessions and then find their relevant station on board.
And then, right in the middle of all this commotion, the boat train arrives with more passengers, and they all have to be taken to their berths very, very quickly.
Of course, once you'd made sure your luggage and cargo was on board the ship, you would then walk up one of the main reception areas. And of course, waiting for you would be the band, playing one of a number of songs as part of an official welcoming to this wonderful ship and the whole experience. That was your first experience of the Titanic. Music, lots of people waiting with drinks, giving you canapé. It was all part of this experience that you were part of a very exclusive party setting sail on a big adventure.
Dear Mrs. Burbage, you cannot imagine how pleased I was to find your exquisite basket of flowers in our sitting room on the steamer. But what a ship! So huge and so magnificently appointed. Our rooms are furnished in the best of taste and most luxuriously. Very sincerely yours, Ida R. Strauss.
Well, the first-class passengers aboard the Titanic would have expected a huge range of music. You know, at the time, the things that were popular were music hall numbers, light opera, ragtime, which is a real kind of early form of jazz. So the musicians had to know a huge amount of music.
First-class passengers would be given a music booklet that simply had titles and numbers next to the titles, and someone would shout out, "Number 1, for example." That was the Barber of Seville Overture by Rossini.
There were more than 352 tunes on the White Star Line's list of music, and it was the responsibility of the band leader, Wallace Hartley, to ensure that his fellow musicians knew every one of them by heart. Hartley was just 33 years old, from Colne in Lancashire. He'd worked on liners before.
The band would have played in various parts of the ship. They wouldn't always play together, they'd split up. A trio, for example, might go to the Café Parisien and play as a palm court trio. It was known as a palm court trio because they tended to be concealed by potted palms. A quintet would play in the reception room in first class, or it might play for dancers after meals so that the tables would be pushed back, a parquet flooring exposed, perfect for waltzing. The band would strike up, and sometimes the band would play in the second class saloon. It would not play for the third class passengers.
My dear Kit, the ship is like a palace. There's an uninterrupted deck run of 165 yards for exercise, and a ripping swimming bath, gymnasium and squash racket court, a huge lounge and surrounding verandas. My cabin is ripping. Hot and cold water and a very comfy looking bed and plenty of room. Write and tell me how you're getting on. 1 letter a week ought not to overtower you. Your loving dad.
A maiden voyage in Southampton was always an exciting thing, but on this day, the 10th of April 1912, it was more exciting than ever. Lightoller, Titanic's second officer, described Titanic as a nest of bees, but he said that on sailing day, she was like a hive about to swarm. Titanic's captain for this maiden voyage was Captain Smith, affectionately known as EJ. He was regarded as the millionaire's captain. He was witty, charming, and sophisticated. Everyone wanted to sail with Captain Smith.
The first stopping point for the Titanic's maiden voyage was Cherbourg, and this was part of the grand strategy to have the greatest and best people on board. So this is where Europe's elite actually boarded the Titanic. people from high society in Paris, and of course from other parts of Europe as well, making up a large proportion of the 26 or 27 nationalities that you can count on the ship's manifest.
Well, the people traveling on the Titanic were a mixed bag of people, a Noah's Ark. They were American multimillionaires like John Jacob Astor IV and his brand new wife. There were people like Isidore Straus, who owned Macy's. There were businessmen traveling back from business trips to Europe.
There were more than 30 millionaires on board Titanic, so many the press called it the Millionaires' Special.
For it to be known that you were on this maiden voyage was part of not only society gossip, but also part of a larger public knowledge of what you were up to.
After a 6-week holiday in Italy, the silent screen star Dorothy Gibson was returning to New York on Titanic to shoot a new movie. She was the highest paid film actress in the world, one of more than 300 first-class passengers who'd paid up to £512 for a parlour ticket, the equivalent in today's money of £45,500. But the majority of passengers on board were in third, or steerage, class.
One could say that the steerage in the Titanic represented or resembled life in New York or in Chicago or any of the large American cities, that it was a polyglot mixture of the many peoples of Europe.
Many of the people were almost fleeing their former lives, and there's one case in particular, Michel Navratil and his 2 sons, Michel Jr. and Edmund, and he'd recently separated from his wife, and unbeknown to her, Michel Sr. had booked them on board the Titanic to take them to America. In many ways, he was stealing the children away from his former wife.
After Cherbourg, the final port of call to pick up passengers and mail was Queenstown, now Cove, in Southern Ireland.
One of the luckiest and most fascinating passengers on the Titanic is Father Brown. He was booked in for a pleasure trip simply from Southampton to Cherbourg and then to Queenstown.
Father Brown, a keen amateur photographer, captured some of the few photographs of life on board Titanic to survive, including the only photograph of guests enjoying the first-class dining saloon, the biggest room afloat. Before he disembarked at Queenstown, Father Brown captured these images of third-class steerage passengers waiting to get on board. A total of 2.5 million Irish people sailed from here during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Some 30,000 emigrated to America in 1912 alone.
The people who were ready to board the Titanic in Queenstown would have been prepared to leave often their lives behind and to emigrate for a new life in America. This was nothing new in Ireland. For many people, there were limited job opportunities, and the choice for many was obvious, was to leave and to make a new life for themselves overseas.
As well as taking on 120 passengers at Queenstown, Titanic loaded 1,385 mail bags. At 1:30 on the 11th of April, Titanic cast her moorings in Queenstown and steamed out into the Atlantic. There were 2,235 people on board. Father Brown captured these last images of the ship as she set sail for New York.
Doesn't seem that way, but maybe it's the perfect day. Even though the bills are piling, maybe Lady Luck ain't smiling. And if we only open
blessings in disguise. And all the rain clouds are fountains, though our troubles seem like mountains. There's gold in them hills, there's gold in them hills. So don't lose heart, give the day a chance to start. Every now and then life says, where'd you think you're going so fast? We're up to think it's cruel, but sometimes it's a case of cruel to be kind. If we get up off our knees, why then we'd see the forest for the trees, and we'd see the new sun rising over the hills on the horizon. There's gold in them hills, there's gold in them hills. So don't lose faith, give the world a chance to say a word or two, my friend. There's no telling how the day might end. We'll never know until we see that there's gold in them hills, there's gold in them hills. So don't lose heart, give the day a chance to start. There's gold in them hills, there's gold in them hills.
From the moment she'd left Queenstown, Titanic made excellent progress, averaging a speed of 22 knots. As the good weather continued, she covered more than 500 miles a day. Titanic was exceeding expectations.
The science of shipbuilding has now reached to a degree of perfection in its highest form, which has put wind and water almost at defiance. It has not only robbed the sea of its terrors, but it has imposed upon its unstable surface comforts and even luxuries of travel surpassing anything on land.
There was great emphasis at the time on the safety arrangements of the ship. And in promoting this, the White Star Line used the term the ship would be practically unsinkable. And they were referring in particular to the system of watertight compartments in the ship. And in its promotional literature, the White Star Line was saying that the captain on the bridge, by pressing a button, could electronically close the watertight doors in the event of an accident, practically making the ship unsinkable. And of course, the inference in saying it was practically unsinkable was tantamount to saying it was unsinkable. Problem was there was no effective plan B. And there was really a complacent failure of regulator, shipbuilder and ship owner in not providing sufficient numbers of lifeboats.
By the evening of April the 14th, Titanic was over halfway across the Atlantic.
We all knew perfectly well that we were just about entering the region where icebergs might be sighted and had taken all necessary precautions. Now, throughout the day, there had been the usual wireless messages from different ships reporting the weather, odd icebergs and so forth. But as none of these bergs reported lay on our course, well, they didn't directly concern us. It then came out that one very vital message received in the Titanic's wireless room that night had never been delivered to the bridge. That message came from a ship called the Sabre, warning all ships of heavy pack ice, icebergs and field ice in an area then lying right ahead of the Titanic, and what was still worse, not far away.
The collision took place at 11:40 p.m. ship's time. About midnight, it was realized that the vessel could not live, and about 12:05, the order was given to uncover the boats under the davits.
On Sunday night, we were awoken and thrown out of our bunks by the shock of the collision. But we were not at all afraid, for everything was silent. The lights burned brightly. In fact, we had no cause for alarm. But outside our door, we heard a rising clamour, and we went out and found the passages and corridors full of running people.
In a few moments, I felt the engines slow and stop. The dancing motion and the vibrations ceased suddenly after being part of our very existence for 4 days. And that was the first hint that anything out of the ordinary had happened.
I caught up my daughter Marjorie just as she was in her nightgown, wrapped a white star cabin blanket around her, and started out of the door. My husband followed immediately behind. Neither of us took any of our belongings from the cabin, and I remember that he even left his watch lying on the pillow. We did not doubt an instant that we would return.
The boat deck was thronged with people. Many women and children had to be forcibly put in the boats. They felt much more safe on the decks of the big liner than in the small boats about 90 feet above the waterline.
I heard my husband say, "Go, Lottie. For God's sake, be brave and go. I'll get a seat on another boat." I stumbled to my feet and saw over their heads my husband's back as he walked steadily down the deck and disappeared among the men. His face was turned away, so that I never saw it again. But I know he went unafraid to his death.
Like the sun I might have known. If God had granted me a son, the summers die one by one. How soon they fly on and on. And I am old and will be bring him peace, bring him joy. He is young, he is only a boy. You can take, you can give. Let him be, let him live. If I die, let me die. Let him live. Bring him home. Bring him home. Bring him
The bottom of our boat slapped the ocean as we came down, with a force that I thought must shock us all overboard. We were drenched with ice-cold spray, but we hung on, and the men at the oars rowed us all rapidly away from the wreck.
At midnight, 20 minutes after the collision, it became clear to Captain Smith that the ship was sinking. He called for all boilers to be shut down, and the wireless operator, Harold Bryan, was told to send the first distress call for assistance. Orders were given to uncover the lifeboats and get passengers and crew ready on deck.
It seems that the band, just past midnight, went to the boat deck and people wondered what was going to happen, thinking surely they can't be going to play now. But of course, already rumor was beginning to spread that something had happened to the ship. The band decided, in a really heroic spirit, to play cheery tunes. I think Jock Hume, one of the violinists, said, "We're going to cheer them up a bit with some music." They didn't want the passengers to panic.
At 12:20 a.m., the order was given to start loading the lifeboats, with women and children first. It quickly became clear to passengers that there were enough lifeboats for only half of those on board. On the boat deck, the band played to keep everyone calm.
Some people, when they're frightened, they run and they panic. And I think others retreat to what makes them feel safe and what makes them feel human. And, you know, for musicians that do music for the love of it, music is what makes you feel safe and what makes you feel human. So I imagine that playing for them was not only a comfort for the people on board the ship, but also a huge comfort for them in a time where they didn't know whether they were going to live or die.
It seems likely that the band leader, Wallace Hartley, had not been ordered by the captain to play music. It was a decision taken by him and his fellow musicians.
I don't suppose he waited to be sent for. But after finding how dangerous the situation was, he probably called his men together and began playing. I know that he often said music was a bigger weapon for stopping disorder than anything on earth. He knew the value of the weapon he had, and I think he proved the point.
Hartley and his band played for more than 2 hours. The ship's lights went out at 2:18 in the morning. All the lifeboats had left, but there were still more than 1,500 people on board the sinking ship. Some survivors' accounts describe how Wallace Hartley dismissed his band and continued to play alone.
Wallace Hartley had told a member of a band with whom he'd played on another ship that if disaster were to strike, he was likely to play Nearer My God to Thee. It was a hymn that meant a great deal to him. It was a tune that his father, as choir master of Bethel Chapel in Colin, had introduced to that chapel. If you think that they'd done their best to calm down passengers, and now the moment had come, there were no lights, the lights had gone off, the water was coming around him. Some passengers who survived say that it was circling around his knees. What are you going to play? He's playing his own requiem. He's going to play that tune that he sang as a boy in the chapel at home.
And when on joyful wing, cleaving the sky, sun, moon, and stars forgot, upwards I fly, still all my song shall be, nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee.
It was about 2 o'clock in the morning when the Titanic finally sank. There were 2 terrific explosions and several loud screams as she went down bows first.
We watched the lights go out one by one in the huge ship sliding to her grave on the starlit water, and saw the last long, slow death struggle of the pride of Queen's Island, the greatest and newest ship in the world.
When the Titanic took her final plunge, there was a noise I shall never forget. Shouting, screaming, and explosions. 100,000 fans at a cup final could not make more noise.
We were too far away from the Titanic when it went down to see those who had leaped or those who had been washed into the sea. But we could hear them for some time after. Then all was still, and we knew that the last of them had perished.
Those who love them call them gone, but they live on with a virility immortal. The courage of 1,500 souls who quietly gave their lives for others floods an entire world and makes us humbly eager to give tribute by living nobler lives.
None of us in the lifeboats knew whether any rescue ship had been reached by the Titanic's radio. All during the night we saw lights, all around us, but they proved only to be the flashlights of other lifeboats.
The distress signals sent by Titanic were received at the Marconi radio station at Cape Race in Newfoundland early in the morning of April the 15th. From here, they were sent on all around the world. They were also picked up directly by ships, including the Cunard liner Carpathia. Her captain responded immediately and turned her course to sail full steam to the aid of Titanic. She was just 58 miles away, but with a top speed of 17.5 knots, she wouldn't arrive before Titanic had slipped beneath the waves. Carpathia reached the scene at dawn, and over the next 4 hours picked up 712 survivors.
The sinking of the Titanic was probably the first global news story, simply because of several factors. Firstly, communication was much quicker than it ever had been before. Even as the reports of the ship had sunk, it was being wired out across the world. But I think the expectations surrounding the maiden voyage had again helped to seed this terrible tragedy becoming of interest to absolutely everybody. Such fanfare had greeted its departure, and of course no one thought anything could go wrong. So when the news started to break, everyone was in complete shock.
In America, the New York Times was the first paper to report the sinking, dedicating 12 pages to the disaster the following day. At first, details were sketchy, and White Star Line's offices were besieged with relatives demanding news of their loved ones.
In London, the saddest places of all were the offices of the White Star Line. It was a tragic scene, and as the heartbroken inquirers groped their way out of the doors, the golden spring sunshine which flooded Trafalgar Square only emphasized the contrast of life and death. It was the women who waited, for the only news of those saved was that stating that the majority are women and children. There was no news of the men, only silence.
In Belfast, it was received with disbelief that a ship which had been so recently at the heart of the city was now lying on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. There was an immediate sense of public grieving at the huge loss of life.
You can only imagine how they must have felt when they heard that news. They were devastated. There are stories of grown men actually in tears in the street.
But there were few details of what had happened on the night of the sinking. The only reliable information was that there were more than 700 survivors on the Carpathia, and the world's press was desperate to hear their stories. After 3 days sailing, the Carpathia finally reached New York.
The competition awaiting the Carpathia to get exclusive stories was intense. When the Carpathia was first sighted, the press immediately rushed into action. A number of reporters had already chartered tugboats, and they assembled as a flotilla and followed the Carpathia along toward Pier 54. Once they got close enough, the reporters are said to have been shouting up at the passengers, trying to get any information, any stories they could get.
I shall never forget the night the Carpathia got in. The great pier was packed with people. They were very quiet. There was no noise, no confusion. They were admitted by ticket only, and the police regulations were perfect. I saw the red lights of the Carpathia turning in, bringing with her what sad and dreadful news. There was an ominous stillness as the gangway was made fast. And then as the people came off, such scenes as no one could forget.
Once ashore, the survivors gave their accounts of the disaster. Not only did the personal stories come out, but now there was a definitive list of those who'd survived. It was confirmed that over 1,500 people had lost their lives. Included in the list were some of the richest, most prominent people of the day. In total, 48% of the children, 25% of the women, and 80% of the men on board were unaccounted for. Nowhere was the wait for news more agonizing than in Southampton, home to 700 of the crew.
This morning, the thirst for news that has tortured Southampton for 3 days was at last assuaged. At 7 o'clock, a clerk came out of the White Star offices down by the docks and placed on the huge blackboard outside the list of the saved among the crew. At that time, there was no one about except the women who have waited there in the street almost without moving. None of them, certainly, have slept since Tuesday night. As the names appeared, printed in big blue letters, a dreadful gasp of apprehension was heard, and the women pressed up close, eager, and yet hardly daring to read.
Of the 700 crew from the city, more than 500 had died. It was said that there was hardly a street in Southampton that hadn't lost someone on the ship.
My dear mother and all, I don't know how to write to you or what to say. I feel I shall go mad sometimes, but as much as my heart aches, it aches for you too, for he is your son, and the best that ever lived. I had not given up hope till today that he might be found, but I'm told all boats are accounted for.
I'm never leaving this place. I'm never leaving this place. Oh, baby, no. the clouds fall on you. Baby, tell me how is it what you do? And when the sun shines through the rainbow, I know the truth. I know that all my life I will wait for you. I will wait for you. I never see the clouds, no. You, baby. Say, oh, now, baby, won't you tell me how? Won't you tell me how? Oh, tell me see, I never see the clouds fall on you. Now, baby, tell me how is it what you do? And when the sun shines through the rainbow, I know the truth. I know that I'll wait for you. I never see the clouds fall on you.
In the aftermath of the disaster, the people of New York took pity on the survivors. They left money and clothes for the 212 crew members whose pay had been stopped when Titanic sank. On the 20th of April, the crewmen were taken back to England. But in New York, there still remained 2 young survivors.
The great mystery in the immediate aftermath of the Titanic is who are these 2 children who don't have any parents. They immediately get labeled the Titanic orphans, and their photographs are reproduced in newspapers around the US, around the UK, around the world to try to find out who they are.
The 2 boys who spoke only French were being looked after by a first-class passenger, Margaret Hayes, at her home on West 83rd Street. Eventually, their identity was discovered.
The 2 Navratil boys had lost their father in the tragedy and had been rescued, and it was only by chance that their mother had read the account of their arrival in New York and suddenly realized these were her children. So, of course, she jumped on the first ship, headed over, and was reunited with her lost children.
The grim task of recovering bodies from the North Atlantic was given to the crew of Mackay Bennett, a cable-laying ship chartered by White Star. She recovered 306 bodies, including that of John Jacob Astor. In his pocket, he had $3,000 in cash, the equivalent today of $70,000. Dressed in evening wear, the corpse of the band leader, Wallace Hartley, was reported to be found with his music case still attached.
Wallace Hartley's body was brought back to Liverpool. It was taken by train all the way to Colin. At Colin, a memorial service was held, and the crowd number was estimated at nearly 40,000. Dependents of the band were not entitled to any compensation. The band had actually gone on board as second-class passengers. They were employees of the agency in Liverpool, not employees of White Star Line. So White Star Line, of course, thought they owed them no compensation.
6 days after the funeral, the Orchestral Association organised a memorial concert for the musicians at the Royal Albert Hall.
500 musicians from many different orchestras all arrived to play at the Royal Albert Hall for this. They had an extraordinary array of conductors. Elgar was one of the conductors. And the proceeds from that concert were to help the families deal with their loss.
In a way, there was this tremendous outpouring of public grief. And this was the beginning of the Titanic memorial industry. Entrepreneurs, sensing a ready market, produced mementos of the disaster.
The most readily available were postcards, but there were also songs and music produced all around the world. And for the first-class passenger and film star Dorothy Gibson, The Titanic was an opportunity to turn tragedy into profit. Within 4 weeks of the sinking, she had released a film about the disaster starring herself, wearing the dress she had worn that night. In Belfast, life returned almost to normal. At the Harland and Wolff shipyard, which had lost 9 men in the disaster, including the ship's designer Thomas Andrews, work continued on Britannic, the third in the trio of giant ships. But the scars of Titanic ran deep.
Initially in Belfast, there was a certain measure of embarrassment or sort of shame, the fact that this had been made in Belfast and this was not something that people really wanted to talk about or to be associated with. I think over time that has changed. People have become more interested in the Titanic. People are seeing it more as a recognition of that something great was achieved and what it means for the place where it was actually born.
The Titanic, to so many people, in different ways represented a dream. For the wealthy owners, it was the dream of dominance of the North Atlantic shipping route. For the immigrants, it was the dreams of a better life. For my great-grandfather, it was the dream of the next meal. It was food on the table and a steady job. Everybody had their own piece of ownership, I think, of the Titanic.
As a result of those events 100 years ago, maritime regulations were changed. Ships had to carry enough lifeboats for all passengers and crew. Bigger vessels had to be equipped with a permanently manned Marconi set, and an international ice patrol was established, which runs to this day. But the sinking of the Titanic did not deter the shipping lines from their quest to build ever bigger and better ships. Just 2 months after Titanic sank, a German ship, the Imperator, took the title of the world's largest vessel, 52,000 tons. Modern passenger liners can be 4 times bigger. And what of Belfast 100 years on? Queen's Island, where the ship was built, is once again thriving. On the Harland and Wolff site is a new exhibition commemorating the Titanic, as the city embraces her legacy and the extraordinary achievements of the Edwardian shipbuilders. That exhibition in the city's Titanic Quarter serves as a reminder of the human endeavor that built the Titanic, the tragedy that befell her, the bravery of those on board, and the souls who were lost that night. I hope that tonight we've made a modest contribution to the legacy of the Titanic. From everyone here in the Waterfront Hall and the thousands watching in Belfast, good night.
I'll sing it one last time for you. Then we really have to go. You've been the only thing that's right in all I've done, and I can barely look at you, but every single time I do, know we'll make it anyway, away from here. Light up, as if you have a choice, even if you cannot hear my voice. I'll be right beside you, dear. Louder, and we'll run for our lives. I can hardly speak, I understand why you can't raise your voice to say Please say